Hello there and welcome back. In this lecture video, we are going to talk about the protists. So what are protists? The word protist is a historical term that is now used informally to refer to a diverse group of microorganisms, eukaryotic organisms, and it's not considered a formal taxonomic term because the organisms it describes don't really share any evolutionary origin. Historically, the protists were informally grouped into animal-like protozoans or plant-like algae and the fungus-like protists such as water molds. These three groups of protists differ greatly in terms of their basic characteristics. For example, algae are photosynthetic organisms that can be unicellular or multicellular. Protozoa, on the other hand, are non-photosynthetic, mostly, modal organisms, mostly, that are always unicellular. Other informal terms may also be used to describe various groups of protists. For example, microorganisms that drift or float in water are moved by currents are referred to as plankton. Types of plankton include zooplankton, which are modal and non-photosynthetic, and phytoplankton, which are photosynthetic. So the protists are a polyphyletic group, meaning that they lack a shared evolutionary origin. Since the current taxonomy is based on evolutionary history, as determined by the Woese-Fox system, biochemistry, morphology, and genetics, protists are scattered across many different taxonomic groups within the domain Eukarya. Eukarya is currently divided into 6 supergroups that are further divided into subgroups as illustrated in this figure. In this section, we're going to primarily be concerned with the supergroups Amoebozoa, Excavata, and Chromovelata, and these supergroups include many protozoans of clinical significance. The supergroups Opisthokonta and Rhizaria are also included in some protozoans, but they have few clinical significance, so we really don't pay much attention to them in microbiology. In addition to protozoans, Opisthokonta also includes animals and fungi, some of which we'll discuss when we talk about parasitic helminths and fungi. Some examples of Archaeplastids will be discussed in algae as well, and summarized the characteristics of each supergroup and subgroup and list representatives of each. Protozoans inhabit a wide variety of habitats, both aquatic and terrestrial. Many are free-living, while others are parasitic, carrying out a life cycle within a host or within a host's cells and potentially cause illness. There are also beneficial symbionts that provide metabolic services to their hosts. During the feeding and growth part of their life cycle, they are called trophozoites. This is the running around phase, and these feed on small particulate food sources such as bacteria, or they can feed on the same things that you're eating as well if they are intestinal. While some types of protozoa exist exclusively in the trophozoite form, others can develop from trophozoites into an encapsulated cyst stage when environmental conditions are too harsh for the trophozoite. A cyst is a cell with a protective wall, and the process by which a trophozoite becomes a cyst is called encystment. When conditions become more favorable, these cysts are triggered by environmental cues to become active again through excystment. Protozoans have a variety of reproductive mechanisms. Some protozoans reproduce asexually and others reproduce sexually. Still others are capable of both sexual and asexual reproduction. In protozoans, asexual reproduction occurs by binary fission, much like bacteria. It can also happen by budding or schizogeny. In schizogeny, the nucleus of the cell divides multiple times before the cell divides into many smaller cells. The products of schizogeny are called merozoites, and they're stored in structures known as schizons. And we will see when we talk about parasites later on in the semester how these can be medically significant. Protozoans may also reproduce sexually, which increases genetic diversity and can lead to complex life cycles. Protozoans can produce haploid gametes that fuse through syngamy. However, they can also exchange genetic material by joining to exchange DNA in a process called conjugation. This is a different process than the conjugation that we talked about in bacteria. The term protist conjugation refers to a true form of eukaryotic sexual reproduction between two cells of different mating types. It's found in the ciliates, a group of protozoans, and is described later on in this video. All protozoans have a plasma membrane or plasmalemma, and some have bands of protein just inside the membrane that add rigidity, forming a structure called a pellicle. Some protists, including protozoans, have distinct layers of cytoplasm under the membrane. In these protists, an outer gel layer with microfilaments of actin is called the ectoplasm. And inside this layer is a sol, or fluid region of cytoplasm called the endoplasm. These structures contribute to complex cell shapes in some protozoans, whereas others, such as amoeba, have more flexible shapes. Different groups of protozoans have specialized feeding structures, and they may have specialized structures for taking in food through phagocytosis, called the cytostome, and specialized structures for the exocytosis of waste, called a cytoproct. Oral grooves leading to the cytostomes are lined with hair-like cilia to sweep in food particles. Protozoans are heterotrophic, meaning they take food from outside their bodies, with a few exceptions like Euglena that will also have photosynthetic capabilities. Protozoans that are holozoic ingest whole food particles through phagocytosis. Forms that are saprozoic ingest small soluble food particles, usually from their environment. Many protists have whip-like flagella or hair-like cilia made of microtubules that can be used for locomotion. Other protists use cytoplasmic extensions known as pseudopodia, or false feet, to attach the cell to a surface and then allow the cytoplasm to flow into the extension, thus moving themselves forward. And this is called cytoplasmic streaming. Protozoans have a variety of unique organelles, and some lack organelles found in other cells. Some have contractile vacuoles, organelles that can be used to move water out of the cell for osmotic regulation, salt and water balance. Mitochondria may be absent in parasites or altered into kinetoplastids, which are modified mitochondria, or hydrenosomes, and these are specialized structures in these particular protozoa. Common protozoal infectious diseases include malaria, giardia, and toxoplasmosis. Less common diseases include African trypanosomiasis and amoebic dysentery. Each condition affects the body differently. So with toxoplasmosis, healthcare providers can identify this in several different ways depending on where it's causing an infection, including antibody blood tests, PCR tests, stains of tissues, direct isolation of the pathogen, and such. Giardia is one that I have some personal familiarity with, and this can be found through stool antigen tests and by looking at stools under a microscope. It may take multiple stool samples, maybe 3, to diagnose this, as they're pretty hard to detect, even though they look very unique. Intimina histolytica can also be identified from stool samples, and it may also be identified under a microscope through a PCR test, antigen test, or an antibody test in the blood. Human African trypanosomiasis is diagnosed through blood tests, fluid tests, or a biopsy from a lymph node. Trypanosoma brucei parasites can be usually found in the blood of infected people. Diagnosing protozoan diseases often involves blood tests, stool tests, or biopsies, as you can see. And a healthcare provider will decide which is more appropriate based on which protozoa they suspect. But some of these mimic bacterial infections or viral infections really well, so you may be subjected, as I was, through several courses of antibiotics before they figure out, oh, you've got a Giardia infection. We need to take a different tack for this one. So with algae, or singular alga, are mostly made up of protists that can be either unicellular or multicellular, and they vary widely in size, appearance, and habitat. Algal protists are surrounded by cell walls made of cellulose, a type of carbohydrate. It's also shared with plants. Algae are photosynthetic organisms that extract energy from the sun and release oxygen and carbohydrates into their environment. And microalgae are mostly implicated in the creation of probably 90% of the oxygen that we have here on Earth. We may think that it's the rainforests and such, but it's actually diatoms and other unicellular algae floating around in the ocean. Cyanobacteria, a type of archaea, is also considered an algae, but these organisms are prokaryotic and therefore have peptidoglycan-based cell walls or some other substance that doesn't occur in the more traditional types. Because other organisms can use waste products of all algae for energy, algae are important parts of many ecosystems and food webs. Many consumer products contain ingredients derived from algae, such as carrageenan or alginic acid, which are found in some brands of ice cream, salad dressing, beverages, lipstick, and toothpaste. A derivative of algae also plays a prominent role in microbiology, and that is agar. That is actually derived from a particular type of algae. So the algae are autotrophic protists that can be unicellular or multicellular, and they're found in supergroups. A lot of these can be the source, like I said, of agar and other helpful things, but some of them can be medically significant. Although algae are typically not pathogenic, some produce toxins. Harmful algal blooms, which occur when algae grow very quickly and produce dense populations, can produce high concentrations of toxins that impair liver and nervous system function in aquatic animals and even humans. Like protozoans, algae often have different complex cell structures. For instance, algal cells can have one or more chloroplasts that contain structures called pyrenoids to synthesize and store starch. Other chloroplasts themselves differ in the number of membranes, indicative of secondary or rare tertiary endosymbiotic events. Primary chloroplasts have two membranes, one from the original cyanobacteria and one from the ancestral eukaryotic cell that ate it, and they were able to coexist. Chloroplasts in some lineages appear to have resulted from secondary endosymbiosis, in which another cell engulfed a green or red algae cell that had already had a primary chloroplast within it. The engulfing cell destroyed everything except for the chloroplast and possibly the cell membranes from its original cell, leaving 3 or 4 layered membranes around each chloroplast. Different algal groups have different pigments, which are reflected in the common names such as red algae, brown algae, and green algae. Some algae, the seaweeds, are macroscopic and they may be confused with plants even though they are not plants. Seaweeds can be red, brown, or green depending on their photosynthetic pigments, and they're usually found in layers, with green being towards the surface, brown just a little bit further down, and red at the deepest depths. Green algae in particular share some important similarities with land plants. However, there are important distinctions between the two groups. For example, seaweeds do not have true tissues or organs like plants do. Additionally, seaweeds do not have a waxy cuticle to prevent desiccation. Algae can also be confused with cyanobacteria, which are photosynthetic bacteria and archaea that bear a resemblance to algae. However, cyanobacteria are prokaryotic. Algae have a variety of life cycles, and reproduction may be asexual by mitosis or sexual using gametes. Although the algae and protozoa were formerly separated taxonomically, they are now mixed into supergroups. The algae are classified within the Chromatophyllata and the Archaeplastida, although the euglenozoa, within the supergroup Excavata, include photosynthetic organisms. These are not necessarily considered algae because they feed and they are motile. So they're kind of a hybrid between a plant and a protist, or an algae and a protist. The Dinoflagellates fall within Chromatophyllata, and these are mostly marine organisms that are important components of plankton. They have a variety of nutritional types and may be phototrophic, heterotrophic, or mixotrophic, which means they do both. Those that are photosynthetic use chlorophyll A, chlorophyll C2, and other photosynthetic pigments. They generally have 2 flagella, causing them to whirl around in place. In fact, the name Dinoflagella comes from the Greek word for whirl. And some have cellulose plates that form hard outer coverings, the theca, and that acts kind of like armor. Additionally, some dinoflagellates produce neurotoxins that can cause paralysis in humans or fish. Exposure can occur through contact with water containing the dinoflagellate toxins or by feeding on organisms that have eaten dinoflagellates. When a population of dinoflagellates becomes particularly dense, a red tide, a type of harmful algae bloom, can occur. This is mostly seen in the organism Carina brevis. Red tides can cause harm to marine life, and if they're aerosolized by sea breezes, they can cause respiratory distress in humans. Also, humans that consume contaminated marine life, especially shellfish like oysters, can also have toxic repercussions. Major toxin producers include gonolax and adrenium, and carina, like I was talking about before, Carina brevis, which causes paralytic shellfish poisoning. Other species like Pfisteria are known as fish killers because certain parts of its life cycle can produce toxins that are harmful to fish, and appears to be responsible for a suite of symptoms including memory loss and confusion in humans that are exposed to water that contain this species. Now, on the pretty side of things, bioluminescent dinoflagellates can make a flash of light inside its cell when it's disturbed. This light is the result of a chemical reaction using a light-emitting molecule called luciferin. In the case of dinoflagellates, this luciferin has the structure very similar to that of chlorophyll, which is what the organism might use to gather light during the day. Some of the brightest kinds of dinoflagellates leading to visible blooms are Noctiluca, which is the more common one. Left alone, dinoflagellates will not make much light, but if something tries to capture them, or they get disturbed by wave action, or it swims past and stirs up, something swims past, like a human, swims up or stirs up the water, they're going to be triggered to display. There are two suspected functions for these flashes. One is to startle the organism that's trying to eat the dino, and the second is like a burglar alarm. Burglar alarm means that if something is swimming through the larger bloom of dinoflagellates, then the organism which is threatening will leave it which is threatening them will leave it alone. For example, a shrimp grazing on dinoflagellates might be captured by a fish which notices the light that it's emitting and drawing to that feeding shrimp, so thus protecting the dinoflagellate also. The stramophiles include the golden algae, Chrysophyta and Phaeophyta, and the diatoms, which are Basilurophyta, and they tend to contain chlorophyll A, C1, and C2, and fucoxanthin as photosynthetic pigments. Their storage carbohydrate, don't worry, you don't need to remember that for an exam. Their storage carbohydrate is chrysomelarin, and while some lack cell walls, others have scales. Diatoms have frustrules, which are an outer cell wall of crystallized silica, and their fossilized remains are used to produce diatomaceous earth, which has a range of uses like filtration, insulation, and, oddly enough, killing bugs. Additionally, diatoms can reproduce sexually and asexually, and the male gametes of centric diatoms have flagella, providing directed movement to seek female gametes for sexual reproduction. Brown algae, or Phaeophyta, are multicellular marine seaweeds, and some can be extremely large, such as the giant kelp that we have here in California, Laminaria. They have leaf-like blades and stalks and structures called holdfasts that are used to hold them to the substrate. However, these are not true leaves, stems, or roots, as they would be in plants. Their photosynthetic pigments include chlorophyll A, C, beta-carotene, and fucoxanthin, and they use laminarian as a storage carbohydrate. Now, one of the interesting things about these guys is they can grow incredibly fast, as much as a foot a day. So it's pretty remarkable. The Archaeplastids include the green algae and the red algae, and the Charophyta are the most similar to land plants because they share a mechanism of cell division and an important biochemical pathway, among other traits the other groups don't have. Like land plants, the Charophyta and the Chlorophyta have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B as photosynthetic pigments, cellulose cell walls, and starch as a carbohydrate storage molecule. Chlamydomonas, which we call LRTGs, or little round green things, are green algae that have a single large chloroplast, two flagella, and a stigma or eye spot, which is often red. Chlorella is a non-modal large unicellular algae, and Acetabularia is an even larger unicellular green algae. The size of these organisms challenges the ideas that all cells are small. They have been used in genetics research for quite a while, and looking at research models to try and understand the evolution of multicellularity. And that's all I have to say on these particular organisms. So please stop the lecture and write down any questions that you may have and any questions that you think I might come up with as exam questions. And remember, I'm not going to go deep into taxonomy on these guys, but I do want you to know which ones are medically significant especially.